It was the summer of 2013. I had just turned 34 and was living in central Ohio, trying to keep my life together after everything had fallen apart. The divorce had gone through that March, and it had taken a chunk out of me I didn't think I'd ever get back. I was still living in the house we used to share, though everything inside it felt empty, like it had been drained of color and sound. Every little creak reminded me of her. Even the dog had gone with her, which made the place feel less like a home and more like a building I slept in. I worked a construction job, framing mostly, paid well enough, and the guys on the crew were fine, but I wasn't really close to any of them. I kept to myself. I didn't drink much anymore either, not after that first messy month after the papers were signed. I just worked and came home, sometimes stopping at the gas station for a sandwich or a coffee, then just laying in bed with the TV on, volume low. Around mid-June, I started thinking more and more about getting out for a few days, just disappearing into the woods with my pack and tent and seeing if being away from everything would do something good for my head. I'd done a lot of camping as a kid, Boy Scouts, family road trips, that sort of thing. Always loved it. I hadn't done it much as an adult, though. Life always got in the way. One Friday morning before work, I pulled out an old atlas and started flipping through the pages, looking for somewhere quiet and off the beaten path. I settled on Wayne National Forest, about 3 hours southeast of Columbus. Big place, not too touristy, and far enough that it felt like I'd really gone somewhere. I didn't want to camp in a public site with picnic tables and fire rings. I wanted to be deep in the trees, where I wouldn't see or hear another soul. I took the next Thursday and Friday off work, packed up my gear that Wednesday night: tent, sleeping bag, stove, canned food, water filter, knife, matches, flashlight, the usual. I didn't tell anyone I was going. No one would have cared much anyway. I left before sunrise on Thursday, driving south in my beat-up Toyota Tacoma, enjoying the cool air and empty roads. I reached the forest around mid-morning, parked on a gravel pull-off where the map said an old logging trail cut through the trees, and hiked in. The air smelled good, like pine and damp earth, and there was no one around for miles. I walked for about 4 hours before I found a clearing just big enough for my tent. The ground was soft, and there was a little rise nearby that gave me a view through the trees, eastward. Felt perfect, like I'd stepped out of my life and into some forgotten place. I set up camp, made some coffee on my little stove, and sat on a rock with my boots off, watching the breeze move through the branches. I stayed like that for a long time, not really thinking about anything. That night, I made some beans and rice, read a few pages from an old paperback I'd brought, and went to bed not long after sunset. I was tired from the hike and the fresh air. I slept hard. The first night was fine. I woke up a few times to sounds, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but that's normal out there. Animals moving around. You get used to it. I wasn't scared. The next day I spent exploring. I left most of my gear at the site and followed a dry creek bed for a few miles, then cut north until I reached a rocky outcrop. From there, I could see a long stretch of forest in every direction. Not a building or a person in sight. That was what I wanted.
No voices.
No traffic. No reminders of anything. Just trees and sky. I got back to camp late in the afternoon and noticed something weird right away. One of the tent stakes was pulled out. Not all the way, just enough that one corner of the tent had gone loose and folded a little. I was sure I'd set it properly the day before. I always double-check my setup. It wasn't windy while I was gone either. The air had been dead still all day. Still, I didn't think too much of it. Maybe I messed up. I hammered it back in, tightened the lines, and didn't let my mind wander about it. But I didn't sleep as well that night. The second night, I woke up sometime after midnight. I didn't know why at first. Everything was quiet, no wind, no rain, no animals. Just the faint sound of the woods breathing. I stayed there, staring up at the black curve of the tent's ceiling, listening hard. I didn't hear anything at first. Then I caught it, this low, steady sound. Not quite footsteps, more like pressure on the ground. Like something large was shifting its weight slowly just outside the tent. It wasn't close, maybe 20 feet off. I held my breath. The sound came again. A soft, deliberate crunch, like a boot on dry leaves. Then nothing. Silence. Then another. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It was someone walking slowly in a circle around my tent. I stayed completely still. I didn't have a gun. I never brought one camping, just a fixed blade knife I used for cooking and wood. My flashlight was in the side pocket of my sleeping bag. I didn't reach for it. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want whoever it was to know I was awake. The footsteps stopped after a while. I couldn't say how long. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion or stress. I don't remember the moment I drifted off, just that I woke up feeling drained and cold, with a dry mouth and a knot in my gut. The area outside looked normal in the morning. No tracks, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had been there. I kept telling myself it was probably a deer or something, but I'd heard deer before. This was different, heavier, slower. I stayed in camp that day, half thinking I'd pack up and head back. But I didn't. I told myself I was overreacting. I made a fire, boiled water for coffee, whittled a stick down to a point for no real reason, just to keep my hands busy. I didn't explore or hike. I stayed close. That afternoon, I saw something across the clearing. Just a flicker, like movement behind the trees. I stared for a long time but didn't see anything again. No sound. No birds either, now that I thought about it. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. At dusk, I gathered more firewood and made a bigger fire than usual. I didn't want to sit in the dark. I ate fast and kept my flashlight in my hand while I sat by the flames. The woods pressed in around me like a wall. I didn't hear anything, but I felt watched. I didn't sleep at all that third night. Every sound made me freeze. I heard twigs snapping again, something closer than before. Once, I swore I heard breathing, like a slow exhale. I gripped the knife under my blanket and waited. At one point, I flicked on my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. Nothing, just trunks and branches and shadows. Then I saw it, a shape, not a full figure, just part of one. Behind a tree, maybe 30 feet away, I saw the edge of a shoulder and part of a leg. Someone was standing there, barely visible, not moving. I turned the light off immediately. I didn't want them to know I'd seen them. I lay there, heart thudding so hard I thought it would give me away. I waited. I didn't hear retreating footsteps. I didn't hear anything. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. When I woke up, the sun was just coming up. My fire was cold ash. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the damp morning air. That's when I saw the footprints, clear as day, in the soft dirt, about 15 feet from my tent. They weren't mine. Too big, wider. The pattern on the sole was strange too, more like a work boot than a hiking boot. And they weren't walking away. They were just there, like someone had stood in one spot watching. I packed up immediately, threw everything into my pack, took down the tent in record time, and started hiking back the way I came. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out of those woods. After about an hour of fast hiking, I stopped to catch my breath and check the map. I had about 2 miles to go when I saw something ahead on the trail. A shape. It was a man. He was standing off to the side of the path, facing away from me, maybe 40 yards ahead. He wasn't moving, just standing there. He wore a dark jacket and jeans. Something about the way he was standing was all wrong. Too still, too deliberate, like he was waiting. I backed up slowly and stepped off the trail, moving quietly into the underbrush. I made a wide circle through the trees, cutting parallel to the trail for a while, heart pounding the whole time. I didn't run. I moved steady and quiet. Eventually, I made it back to the road. My truck was untouched. I got in, locked the doors, and started driving without looking back. I didn't tell anyone about it. Who would I tell? The cops? What would I say? That I saw a man in the woods? That someone might have watched me while I slept? No laws against being creepy in the woods. I've never gone camping alone since. I still think about it, though. Not every day, but more than I'd like to admit. I wonder if he was following me the whole time. If he saw me park, saw me hike in. Maybe he camps out there, waiting for people like me, alone, vulnerable, out of touch. Or maybe he doesn't wait. Maybe he just watches. Maybe next time he won't. I was 34 the year I camped in the graveyard behind Millhaven Church. It wasn't some dare or test of courage. It wasn't even about saving money or trying to live rough for a while. The truth is, I just needed a quiet place where no one would come looking for me. Not the police, not my ex, not my old boss. No one. It was October 2022. I'd been laid off from my job in Bristol 2 months earlier. I'd worked security at a construction site, mostly night shifts. The company folded after some legal trouble that I didn't want anything to do with. My savings didn't last long. I'd been sleeping out of a van I bought cheap off Facebook Marketplace. Barely ran. By the time I reached a small town called Millhaven, the van had started making noises I didn't like, and I knew I wouldn't get much farther. I parked it behind a half-collapsed barn just outside of town, near a single narrow lane that led through the woods. I was out of options, so I walked. I had my pack on my back, just a sleeping bag, tarp, some cans of food, and a beat-up camping stove I'd stolen from a bloke in Exeter. It was getting dark. My boots were already soaked through from walking in wet grass all day. That's when I saw the graveyard. It was tucked behind the church like an afterthought. The church itself was still standing, barely. Stone walls streaked with moss, roof sagging in places, windows broken out. The graveyard had no gate. A low stone wall lined with thorny shrubs wrapped around it like a warning. The headstones leaned in strange directions. Some were cracked down the middle. Others had sunken into the ground almost completely. There were no flowers, no fresh dirt, no signs that anyone had visited in years. I didn't care. It was quiet. That was all I wanted. I climbed over the wall and found a flat patch of grass near the back, behind a row of tall, rectangular stones. One of them was chipped so badly the name had flaked away, just a year left on it. 1887. That suited me fine. I laid the tarp down and rolled out my sleeping bag on top of it. The ground was soft and spongy. It smelled like wet leaves and old dirt. The air had a damp bite to it, but I'd slept in worse. By the time I settled in, it was pitch dark. No lights from the church, none from the road. Just black woods in all directions. I clicked on my flashlight and checked the perimeter one more time. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I wasn't relaxed either. Sleeping in a graveyard plays tricks on your head, even if you don't believe in all the ghost stories. Still, I figured it was just for the night. I ate a cold can of beans, lit a cigarette, then laid back and stared up at the sky. There were no stars, too much cloud cover. Just the smell of rot and wet stone all around me. I didn't sleep much. It wasn't noise that kept me up. It was the stillness. It was too quiet. I'd spent most of the last month sleeping near roads, under bridges, even one night behind a petrol station. There's always some sound out there. Cars in the distance, a dog barking, wind in the trees. But this place felt dead. No animals, no wind, not even the rustle of leaves. Just this weight pressing down on the dark like a thick blanket. And when I finally did drift off, I dreamed I was being buried alive. Dirt filling my mouth, my eyes, my nose. I woke up gagging. It was still dark. My flashlight was out, battery dead. I felt around for my phone and checked the time, 3:17 a.m. I didn't know why I'd woken up exactly. I didn't hear anything, but I had this crawling feeling in my gut, like something wasn't right. I sat up slowly, ears straining for any sound. My breath steamed in the cold. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not fast, not heavy. Just slow, deliberate steps crunching through the wet grass. At first, I thought maybe someone else was camping nearby. Or maybe a late-night walker or a drunk from town had wandered up here. But the steps were too steady, too cautious. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. I couldn't see anything. The graveyard was thick with trees and shadow. I could barely make out the tops of the headstones. Then the footsteps started again. This time closer. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just sat there in the dark, trying to blend into the cold ground. They kept coming, circling around where I was lying. It was like whoever it was didn't want to be seen, just wanted to be heard. The steps moved behind me, then stopped again. I stayed frozen like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, the footsteps faded away into the trees. When the sun came up, I got up fast and packed everything. My tarp was soaked through, and there were muddy footprints just a few feet from where I'd been sleeping. I followed them with my eyes. They led between two graves, then vanished into the woods behind the church. I told myself it was nothing, just someone from town. Maybe they were walking their dog. Maybe they were just drunk and stumbled into the graveyard by mistake. But I didn't leave. I don't know why. Maybe because the van was out of fuel. Maybe because I had nowhere else to go. Or maybe because part of me wanted to understand what had happened. That crawling feeling hadn't left. It felt like something had started that night, and walking away wouldn't end it. I stayed another night. I moved to a different corner of the graveyard, deeper in near the tree line. I cleared a patch beside a collapsed stone cross and set up again. I found a fresh branch and sharpened one end with my knife, just in case. I kept it close to me when I went to sleep. But I didn't sleep. That night, the footsteps came back. But they didn't stop nearby. They circled the entire graveyard. They started on one side, disappeared for a while, then reappeared on the other side. Over and over again. It wasn't just someone walking through. It was like they were pacing, like they were checking the borders, testing. At one point, I thought I saw something move between two stones. I held my breath. It was tall, hunched, barely a silhouette in the dark. Then it was gone again. By morning, I was shaking. I hadn't slept at all. My teeth hurt from clenching them. I stood up and walked to where I thought I'd seen the figure.
No footprints.
No broken branches. Just grass, stone, and old dirt. Still, I didn't leave. I don't know what kept me there. Felt like leaving would mean losing, like I had to finish whatever this was. I spent the day searching the area. I walked through every corner of the graveyard. I found newer graves in the far back 1990s, early 2000s. One of them had a wooden cross instead of stone. No name on it, no date. Behind the graveyard, I found something else. An old path, half overgrown, led deeper into the woods. It wasn't wide, maybe 2 feet across, but it had clearly been used. The grass was bent, and there were faint tracks in the mud. I followed it. It led to a clearing, maybe 100 yards into the trees. At the center was a pit. It wasn't wide, but it was deep, maybe 6 feet, maybe more. There was a rope hanging down into it, tied to a tree. The walls of the pit were straight and smooth, like someone had cut into the dirt with tools. I didn't go down. There was something about the pit that made my skin go cold. It wasn't just that it was hidden. It was that it looked fresh. The dirt piled at the sides wasn't overgrown. No leaves had gathered in it. Someone had dug it recently. That night, I didn't sleep in the graveyard. I dragged my gear into the church itself and barricaded the door with some broken pews. I didn't light a fire. I didn't turn on a light. I just sat in the dark, gripping my sharpened stick and listening. This time, the footsteps didn't come from the graveyard. They came from inside the church. I heard them just after midnight. Slow, scraping steps on the stone floor. Not heavy, bare feet maybe. I pressed myself into the corner and didn't move. The steps circled the main room, moving between the empty pews. Then they stopped right outside the doorway I was in. I didn't look. I don't know how long they stood there, but eventually they moved away. When the sun came up, I left. I didn't pack. I didn't check the graveyard. I didn't look for tracks. I just ran. I ran down the lane, through the trees, back to the barn where I'd left the van. I didn't stop until I reached it. I pried open the door, threw my gear in, and tried the ignition. Coughed once, then started. I drove until the tank hit empty and coasted to a stop in the next town. I've never been back to Millhaven. I never told anyone about what I saw. There was no one to tell, and even if there was, what would I say? That I heard footsteps in a graveyard? That someone was watching me from behind the headstones? That there was a pit in the woods no one had filled in? It sounds like nothing, but it wasn't. I don't camp anymore. I don't sleep outside. I don't walk alone at night. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I wake up in the dark, I swear I hear them again. The footsteps, still slow, still steady, still looking for something. I went camping alone in early October of 2017, up near a stretch of woods outside a village called Cawthorne in South Yorkshire. I was 34 back then, working long hours at a warehouse job in Wakefield. I hadn't taken a proper break in over a year. It was one of those long shifts where you start losing track of time, and your body's always a bit sore, always a bit behind. So I took a week off, packed light, and decided I'd spend 3 days in the woods on my own. I didn't want to drive too far, just somewhere quiet where I could breathe. I picked that stretch of woods because I remembered walking it years ago during a cold spring. It had a few trails, not too popular, and there was a small water reservoir nearby. I liked the feel of it, secluded but not too wild. The land there rolls a bit, not quite hilly, but uneven enough that you could hike a bit and get winded. I brought a small green tent, a warm sleeping bag, and a few basic tools: compass, pocket knife, matches, 2 torches, and a folding shovel. I also had food that didn't need cooking: oatcakes, canned beans, beef jerky, and a thermos for tea. I wanted quiet, not the full survivalist experience. I didn't tell many people, just left a message with my sister, letting her know I'd be off-grid for a few days. She didn't ask questions. She never does. I arrived around noon, parked along a dirt pull-off near a dead-end road that faded into grass. There was a barely visible walking path that cut through low trees and overgrown brambles. The sky was gray but not yet threatening, just that dull English overcast. I pulled on my backpack, locked the car, and stepped into the brush. The air felt heavier in the trees. I always liked that feeling, how the world gets quieter, like everything slows down. I walked for about an hour, maybe more, following faint old markers until I reached a clearing I had marked out years ago on an old ordnance survey map. The clearing sat on slightly raised ground with a slope behind it that led to a dip in the forest. There was a line of trees that curved around one side like a wall. The other side had a view down into a narrow valley with a little stream threading through it. I pitched my tent facing the slope so I could see the treetops and sky. It took about 20 minutes. Then I sat and listened. Birds somewhere deep, a squirrel darting, and nothing else. It was good. I stayed that first day in the area. Just walked small loops around the clearing, gathered some dead branches, watched the fog roll in from the low areas as it always does when the ground cools. I went to bed early, slept with a torch beside me and my bag zipped high. The second day, I decided to hike down toward the reservoir. I hadn't remembered exactly how far it was, but I figured I'd head south and cut down the ridge. I didn't bring much, just water, a little food, and my torch. I followed the slope until the trees opened again into a second clearing that was even more quiet than the first. The ground there was softer, full of fallen leaves that hadn't been walked on in years. I saw deer tracks. I also noticed an old fence that ran partially around the clearing. Iron bars in the ground, rusted, snapped in places. Nothing was connected anymore, just rotting posts half buried in soil. I paused there, not for any reason I could explain. It was just a different kind of silence. The birds didn't chirp in that spot. The wind didn't move the trees. I left the area quickly and moved downhill, where the sound of the stream picked up again. I found the reservoir not long after. It was still no movement, with a mist floating above it like smoke. There were no boats, no signs, just water and woods. I didn't stay long. I felt off, not scared, just unsettled. I returned to camp by mid-afternoon. The sun was already low. I sat outside the tent and boiled water for tea. I thought I saw movement along the slope, near the edge of the trees. I figured it was a fox, or maybe one of those black and white feral cats people see near farmland. It didn't show itself again. That night, the wind came through stronger. I zipped my tent fully, slipped inside my sleeping bag, and left the torch near my face, switched off. I heard sticks snap outside around midnight. Not heavy ones, just the small dry kind that break under pressure. I stayed still, listened. It wasn't deer. The pattern was too slow. One crunch, then nothing, then another, then quiet. I didn't open the flap. I didn't want to know. I lay awake for at least an hour, maybe more. Then it stopped. No more movement. I drifted into shallow sleep and woke stiff and cold just before sunrise. On the third day, I saw the man. It started the same. Mist low in the valley, sky dull, everything soaked with dew. I packed a few things and went to walk again. I told myself I'd hike one last loop, eat early lunch, and then start packing up to leave. I walked north this time, toward a denser part of the forest where the trees stood taller and closer together. It was darker in there. My boots sunk deeper into the soft ground. I kept my steps quiet. The air smelled damp, like dead leaves and wet bark. That's where I saw him, standing maybe 30 feet away, half blocked by a tree, just on the edge of a small glade I hadn't noticed before. He was motionless, not crouching, not moving, just standing. He wore dark trousers and a heavy coat that looked brown or green. His boots were caked with mud. He had something slung over his shoulder, a bag maybe, but I couldn't tell. His face was turned just slightly away. Couldn't make it out. I stopped walking, didn't make a sound. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't on a trail. This part of the woods wasn't marked. No one should have been there. I waited, just watching him, thinking maybe he'd turn or move or do something, but he didn't. He just stood there like he'd been standing for hours, or days. After a long time, I stepped back slowly. My boots squelched in the ground. I turned around and walked back toward my camp, not fast, but with my chest tight. I looked behind me a few times. The trees were still. Nothing moved. When I reached the tent, I packed as fast as I could. I didn't sit or eat. I didn't stop to check anything. I shoved my gear into the pack, collapsed the poles, wrapped the canvas, and slung everything onto my back. I left the site clean. I didn't want to leave a trace. I didn't want him to follow. The hike back was slower. I stuck to the path but kept turning to check behind me. The trees were full of movement now. Birds lifting, branches swaying. Normal sounds, but every one of them made me flinch. I felt watched the whole way out. I reached the car mid-afternoon. I threw my pack in the back seat and drove. I didn't stop until I was halfway home. Then I pulled into a petrol station, locked the doors, and just sat there for a few minutes with my hands gripping the wheel. My shirt was damp with sweat. My legs ached from the rush. I didn't even remember half the walk. I never found out who he was. I didn't tell anyone. I thought about it, but what would I say? There wasn't a crime. There wasn't proof. Just a man in the woods standing still, too far off the path. Not moving, not blinking, not right. Weeks later, I went online and searched the area. Reports, local news, forums, missing persons, anything. Nothing turned up.
No sightings.
No hikers lost. No bodies found. I looked up old boundaries, land records, woodland maintenance logs. Nothing mentioned that old fence. No one talked about the glade. No maps marked it. I never camped alone again. I still hike sometimes, but only in busy places with well-worn trails. I keep a second phone on me now, carry more gear, and I never stay in one spot longer than a day. The man never moved. That's what haunts me the most. Not that he chased me, not that he spoke, but that he stood there in silence in a forgotten part of the woods and watched, like he was waiting for something. Or maybe for me. And the worst part, the part one don't like thinking about, is how his boots were pointed straight at me, even though his head was turned away, like he already knew I was there. My name is Ray Morgan. This happened in the fall of 2016 in a remote part of northern Montana, about 2 hours outside Libby, close to the Cabinet Mountains. I was 39 back then, just getting back into hunting after taking a few years off. Life had gotten too busy with work. My knees weren't what they used to be, and my focus had shifted to other things. But something inside me kept missing the quiet of the woods, the long mornings in the cold, and that stillness that only comes when you're truly away from everything. So I planned a solo hunting trip. For nights, deep in the forest, away from cell service, away from noise, away from people. It was mule deer season, and the weather had finally cooled down after a warm September. The timing felt right. I packed light but brought everything I needed: .308 rifle, gear, a simple canvas tent, food rations, a butane stove, and a Garmin GPS. I'd scouted this area the year before and marked a few spots on the map where I'd seen heavy deer sign. I left my truck at a trailhead where the dirt road ended. From there, I hiked 6 miles up into the ridges until I reached a small clearing by a dry creek bed. That first day was just about getting settled. I pitched my tent under a thick stand of lodgepole pine, arranged my gear, cleared out a space for a fire, and cooked some canned chili while the sun dropped low and the shadows stretched long across the ground. That night, the temperature dipped hard. The fire burned down to glowing coals, and I crawled into my sleeping bag wearing thermal layers and a wool cap. The first 2 days went exactly how I wanted. Mornings started before dawn. I'd hike up to a high point near the West Ridge, glass the tree lines, look for movement, then drop into lower areas where the deer might be feeding. I saw a few does and one buck too small to shoot, but I didn't care. It wasn't about filling the tag for me. I was just happy to be back out there, walking ridges, breathing in that cold air. The world back home felt far away. Everything was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get in a place untouched by roads and machines. I moved slow, careful to leave no scent. My boots left soft prints in dry leaves. Squirrels darted around and birds called out in the morning light. I never saw another person or heard another shot. Felt like I had the whole forest to myself. But something changed on the third night. Started subtle. After dinner, I was sitting by the fire sharpening my skinning knife, listening to the usual forest sounds. The wind through the trees, the rustle of branches, the crackle of firewood. Then I heard something off. Just a little sound at first. A branch snapping maybe 50 feet from camp. Not loud, not close enough to be urgent, but it caught my attention. I stopped sharpening, listened, waited. Nothing else came. I figured it was a deer moving through, or maybe a raccoon sniffing around. I didn't hear anything after that, and the woods went back to their usual rhythm. I went to bed around 9 p.m., still thinking about it. Later that night, maybe after midnight, I woke up needing to piss. The air in the tent felt colder than usual, still as ice. I unzipped the tent door and stepped out into the dark, flashlight in hand. The fire had burned out. Everything was black. I walked a few yards from the tent and stood facing the trees, relieving myself. That's when I heard something again. A crunch, a footstep, but not the quick scurry of an animal. It was deliberate, heavy, like someone stepping slowly over dry leaves, then stopping. I froze. The light from my flashlight barely reached past the nearby trees. I swept it left, then right. Nothing. No eyes, no movement. Just that silence. I stood there a while longer, not moving, listening. Eventually, I told myself it was nothing and climbed back into the tent. But sleep didn't come easy. I kept listening, waiting to hear another sound. But it stayed quiet the rest of the night. The next morning, I got up before sunrise and made coffee over the little stove. I tried to brush off the nerves. Maybe it was a black bear. Maybe just a tree limb breaking off in the wind. Nothing had been disturbed around camp. My food bag was still hanging high in the tree where I'd strung it the night before. Everything was in its place. Still, something didn't feel right. I kept scanning the woods as I drank my coffee. Then I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A boot print. Not mine. It was faint but clear enough in the soft dirt near the edge of camp, about 20 feet from my tent. The tread was different from mine, and the shape was longer, thinner. It looked like someone had stood there for a bit, then turned around. My stomach turned when I saw it. I didn't hear or see anyone the whole day. I left camp as usual, rifle slung over my shoulder, and hunted along the ridge. I didn't spot any deer. The woods were oddly still. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. I was distracted, checking over my shoulder every hour, stopping often to listen. Every branch that cracked sounded louder than it should. Every gust of wind felt like it was hiding something. That night, I kept the fire going longer than usual. I didn't want to sit in the dark. I sat with my back to the tent and watched the trees, scanning them over and over. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Around 10 p.m., I finally crawled into the tent, but I didn't sleep. Not really. I laid there, boots still on, rifle by my side, waiting. I must have dozed off because I woke up again in the middle of the night. This time, I didn't hear anything right away. I just had that feeling, like someone was nearby, like I was being watched. I slowly unzipped the tent and peeked out. The fire had gone out. Moonlight lit up part of the clearing. And there, at the edge of the trees just past the light, I saw a figure. A man, standing still, not moving, just watching. I couldn't make out details, his face, his clothes, just the shape of him. Tall, still, not approaching, not retreating, just there. I didn't move. I stayed frozen, trying to breathe quiet. I thought about yelling, but my throat was dry. I reached slowly for the rifle beside me and pulled it close. When I looked back, the figure was gone, just vanished into the woods. I sat like that the rest of the night, heart pounding, scanning the trees. But I never saw him again. To first light, I packed up camp fast. I stuffed my gear into my bag, took down the tent in record time, and didn't even bother cooking breakfast. I just wanted out. But as I started the hike back down, I noticed more boot prints. Not mine, not from the way I came up. They circled my camp, twice. Some led into the woods, parallel to the trail I had used the day before. Whoever it was had been watching me longer than I realized.
I hiket fast.
kept my rifle ready. I didn't stop to rest or eat, just pushed through the 6 miles until I reached my truck. When I finally got back to the dirt road, I saw something that stopped me cold. There were tire tracks in the mud, fresh ones, leading away from where I had parked. My truck was untouched, still locked, nothing stolen. But someone else had driven up to that spot while I was in the woods. Someone knew I was up there. I left fast, drove down the dirt road without stopping. I didn't say anything to the rangers, didn't report anything. I couldn't describe the man. I couldn't prove anything. There was no crime, just a feeling in my gut I still can't shake. That trip changed how I see the woods. I still go hunting, but never alone, never that deep. And I always let someone know where I'm going, when I'll be back. Because out there, it's not the animals you need to worry about. It's the people, the quiet ones, the ones who don't want to be found, and the ones who are already there, watching you, before you even realize you're not alone. It was late September 2016 when I took a solo trip out to the Uintas in northeastern Utah. I was 29 at the time, working a construction job in Ogden, and I had just finished a long month of overtime. My girlfriend and I had broken up 2 weeks before, and I'd been living alone in a half-finished rental where the power went out every time I ran the microwave and the heater together. I needed to get away from all of it. I camped a lot as a teenager and even more in my early 20s. But lately, I hadn't had the time. That fall, though, I craved isolation. No signal, no noise, no city. Just space. I packed everything I thought I'd need. My old tent, cooking gear, water filter, freeze-dried food, a bear canister, even some MREs. I loaded it all into the back of my Tacoma and drove out early on a Thursday morning. The hike I picked started at a trailhead just off a forest road, a little over 3 hours from town. I'd never been to this exact part of the mountains before, but I had a good topo map, a compass, and a full charge on my GPS. The plan was simple. Park, hike in about 7 miles to a lake I'd seen on the map, set up camp near the water, and stay 3 nights. No other trails led to the lake. It was tucked far in behind a steep ridge, so I was counting on not seeing a soul the whole time. The drive went smooth. I stopped at a gas station in a town called Hannah, filled up, grabbed a sandwich, and didn't see another car for the last 45 minutes of the trip. The trailhead wasn't marked except for a faded sign nailed to a dead tree. I parked the truck off the road, left a note on the dash with the date and time I expected to be back, shouldered my pack, and started up the trail around 10 a.m. The weather was perfect. Cool air, cloudless sky, not even much wind. The trail was narrow but easy to follow. It snaked through lodgepole pine and aspen, then cut across a dried-up creek bed before climbing gradually toward the ridge. The only sounds were my own footsteps, the occasional squirrel, and the distant caws of crows overhead. It took about 4 hours to reach the ridge. My legs were burning, and I took a long break at the top. From there, I could see the lake below, small, still, deep blue, surrounded on all sides by forest. No signs of other camps, no footprints, no wrappers or beer cans, nothing. It felt untouched. I dropped down the other side and reached the lake around 3:30 in the afternoon. Found a spot tucked between some large boulders and a thick patch of pine. There was a small natural clearing perfect for the tent. I set up camp quickly. Tent up, bear canister stashed a good distance away, water filtered from the lake, and firewood gathered even though I didn't plan to make fires every night. Just one on the first evening, I told myself. For comfort, the first night was peaceful. I ate a hot meal and sat near the fire as the last light faded from the sky. No bugs, no sounds but the wind. By 9 p.m., it was pitch black, and I crawled into the tent. I read for a bit, then fell asleep with my flashlight still in my hand. I woke once in the night, Thought I heard something moving in the trees, but it was faint, and I figured it was just a deer or an elk, maybe even a porcupine. I rolled over and drifted back to sleep. The next day was uneventful, but in the best kind of way. I hiked around the lake, fished for a bit, though I didn't catch anything, then climbed up a short ridge and just sat, watching the sun cut through the trees. That night, I skipped the fire and ate cold food, slept early. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard the noise again. This time it was louder. I sat up, heart going fast. Something had snapped a branch near the tent. I waited, listening. Nothing for a minute. Then another snap closer. I unzipped the tent and shined my light outside. The trees were silent, unmoving. I scanned left and right, saw nothing. No eyes, no movement. Still, I got out, checked the area around the tent, then checked the bear canister. It hadn't been touched. I went back inside and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I looked for tracks. I didn't see any. No claw marks on the trees, no scat, no fur. I told myself it had to be a deer. Maybe it had wandered through and left quietly. That day, I decided to hike further down the lake, just to get my mind off it. I followed the shoreline until it curved east and the trees got denser. As I moved through a narrow part of the forest, I noticed something strange. A tree had been stripped of its bark, but not like by a bear. The bark had been peeled carefully in long strips, and the exposed wood underneath was clean. It looked deliberate. I found another tree the same way 30 feet later. Then another. I didn't like it. The skin of the trees reminded me of something I didn't want to admit. I turned back after that. That night, I couldn't relax. I kept the flashlight in my hand and a small hatchet next to me. I left the tent flap open so I could see out through the mesh. I didn't want to be blind to anything moving around. At 1:41 a.m., I remember the time exactly. I heard footsteps. Not four-legged, not soft. Crunching steps. Bipedal. I froze. The steps moved slowly between the trees. Not fast, not sneaky. Just deliberate. Like someone was walking a slow circle around the camp. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Then they stopped. Silence. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I didn't dare move. The flashlight was off. I was relying on the moonlight coming through the trees. Then I saw it. Not clearly, just movement. Something passed between two trees, about 40 feet away. It wasn't wearing anything bright, just pale arms and legs, thin, wiry. It was too fast to make out details, but it moved wrong. The knees bent weird. The arms looked too long. I didn't know what I was looking at. My brain kept switching between that's a person and no, that's not right. Then I didn't see anything else for the rest of the night. The next morning, I packed everything in less than 15 minutes. I didn't eat, didn't even fill my water bottles. I just grabbed what I could and hiked out as fast as my legs would let me. But that's not where it ends. Because halfway up the ridge, maybe 2 hours from the lake, I found something. A shirt. It was hung up in a tree branch like it had been placed there. Old, sun-faded, torn in the back. It wasn't mine. I didn't recognize the brand or the size. There was dirt on the collar and something dark down the front. I didn't touch it, just stared at it for a long time and then kept walking. I moved faster after that. Every squirrel that rustled a branch, every bird that chirped, made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing again. But I didn't. The trail eventually led me back to the dry creek bed, then through the aspens and finally back to the dirt road where I'd left the truck. The Tacoma was untouched. I threw everything in the back and didn't stop driving until I hit cell service. I didn't report anything. I didn't know what to say. The next week, I looked up missing person reports from that area. I found one from 2014. A guy named Travis went missing in the same range. No one ever found his body. They said he was hiking solo. They said he was experienced. I think about that shirt sometimes, about the stripped trees, about those steps circling my tent. I haven't been back since. I still hike sometimes, but never alone, and never off trail. Something's out there, something that walks like us, watches like us, but it isn't us. And if you ask me what it was, I'll just say this. Some things wear skin better than others, and some things wear it just wrong enough that you notice when it's already too late. I was 32 when I decided to take a week off from everything. I had some money saved, didn't know anyone anything, wasn't in a relationship, and didn't care to be. It was late August of 2017, and the air in northern British Columbia was just starting to cool down at night. I picked a spot way out past Burns Lake, deep in a patch of forest that used to be part of an old logging road. You'd miss the turnoff if you weren't looking for it. No signs, just a gap in the tree line and a rough slope covered in brush. I had an old Dodge pickup, no 4x4, so I parked it at the beginning of the overgrown road and hiked in. The area hadn't been touched for decades from what I could tell. Trees had taken over, and most of the old road was swallowed by roots, moss, and rain erosion. I had a heavy backpack with a tent, food, water filter, and everything else I thought I'd need for 6 days alone. I didn't bring a gun, just bear spray and a hatchet. The reason I chose that area was because I had a map from my uncle. He used to work forestry back in the day. The map showed where a small logging operation had run in the 80s and marked a creek with clear water, an old cabin site, and an equipment shed that might still be standing. That kind of thing always appealed to me. I didn't want tourist trails. I wanted forgotten places, real wilderness. And that's what I got. The first day was peaceful. The silence was heavy, only broken by the crunch of my boots and the occasional creak of branches in the wind. I reached the spot marked cabin just before sunset. There was no cabin, but I found the stone base where it had stood. Just a rectangle of moss-covered foundation stones and a rusted old stove off to one side. I pitched my tent near it, thinking it'd be a good anchor point. The creek was about 40 feet away, flowing slow and clear. Perfect. I built a small fire that night and cooked a tin of stew. The stars were out thick, and there was no light anywhere. I didn't even bring my phone. No signal anyway. I wanted total disconnection. That first night, I slept hard. Dead silence. The second day, I hiked farther down what remained of the old road, curved west and dipped down into a gully. The trees got denser and darker. I saw some prints in the mud, maybe moose or elk. One set looked human, but the shape was wrong. The toes were pointed outward at a wide angle, and the stride was uneven. Maybe some logging boots with cracks, I thought. I didn't dwell on it. About a mile from camp, I found what was left of the equipment shed. It was mostly collapsed, but one wall stood with some iron brackets and cables still nailed into it. I poked around, hoping for something interesting. All I found were splinters of wood and an old saw blade half buried in dirt. No tools, no junk left behind. Strange for a site abandoned decades ago. Usually there's rusted cans, scraps of metal. This place was cleaner than I expected. That night, I stayed close to the fire. Something about the silence felt different. Couldn't place it. There were no insects chirping, no birds calling before sunset. I'd camped in dozens of places before, and even the quietest ones had some kind of sound in the evening. This didn't. It was like everything around me had gone still. I stayed up longer than usual and added wood to the fire in small bits to keep it burning steady. I didn't want a big blaze, just enough light to see a little past the edge of my camp. Around midnight, I heard movement beyond the creek, just a shuffle, a break of twigs. I held my breath. It didn't come closer. I convinced myself it was a deer, maybe a bear sniffing for scraps. I didn't leave any food out, though. I didn't sleep that well. On the third day, I woke up tired and sore. My back ached like I'd slept on rocks. But I remembered laying my sleeping pad flat. When I looked under the tent, I saw the rocks had been moved, like someone had rolled them around under the tent during the night. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I told myself maybe the ground had shifted from water or some animal digging nearby. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I spent the day gathering wood, fixing the fire ring with extra stones, and doubling the tent pegs. I also rigged up a noise trap with a string and some old tin I'd found by the stove, just enough to rattle if someone or something moved past it. I didn't usually do that. I never needed to, but something felt wrong, and I couldn't shake it. That night, the fire burned low, and I sat with the hatchet across my legs. My legs were stiff. My hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. I didn't hear anything at first, but I felt something, like being watched. That deep gut sense you can't explain, but you know it's real. Then I heard the tin rattle, just once. A soft clink, followed by silence. I froze. The hair on my neck stood up, and I didn't move for several minutes. I strained my ears. Nothing, just silence again. I stayed up until dawn, never leaving the tent, just sitting in the dark with my hand on the hatchet. The fourth day, I checked the trap. The string had been pulled, not snapped, but moved just enough that it had gone slack. The tin had been picked up and set down, not dropped. There were no prints, no signs of animals. I decided I was done.
Ipacket fast.
Tent, food, gear, everything went into the bag. I didn't eat, just drank water and got moving. The path out was longer than I remembered. The trees were closer. Every time I turned, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my vision. Nothing ever stayed long enough to focus on. Just flickers, shadows between trunks. I kept walking. About halfway back to the truck, I passed a tree with a mark on it. A deep gouge, long and clean like someone had dragged a knife or blade down the trunk. It wasn't there 3 days ago. I would have noticed. Then I saw another one. Same shape, same height. Then another, 10 feet apart, like a trail. They led straight down toward the old gully, away from the path out. I didn't follow them. When I reached the truck, I tossed the pack in the bed and didn't look back. I drove 2 hours before stopping. I didn't feel safe until I hit pavement again. When I got home, I dumped everything in the garage and didn't touch it for days. The gear smelled wrong, like wet soil and iron. I threw the tent out, burned the clothes. A week later, I looked up logging records for that area. The site wasn't on any recent maps, not even satellite ones. The last official record was from 1986. They stopped operations early, citing unfavorable terrain and safety concerns. No details. I still think about it sometimes. The prints, the moved rocks, the string, the scratches on the trees, and the quiet, how everything just stopped moving around me. Like I wasn't supposed to be there, like something else had claimed the place after the loggers left. I haven't camped alone since. I still go out sometimes with friends close to town, where I can see the highway or a gas station light through the trees. But deep forest? No way. Something was in that patch of woods. Something that didn't want me there. And I listened. My name is Mark Dawson. I was 34 years old at the time, and it was the summer of 2016 when this happened. I had taken some time off work from the cabinet shop I ran with my cousin in northern Minnesota. I'd been grinding 6 days a week for almost 2 years straight, and after finally finishing a massive order of kitchen sets for a hotel remodel, I told him I was going off the grid for a few days to recharge. I chose a secluded patch of forest near the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, not far from a narrow creek called Mudjaw Run. It wasn't a campground. It wasn't marked. It wasn't even listed on most local maps. I had found it years back while hunting, and I always remembered it being quiet, green, and untouched. Most people passed it by because it sat a good 20 miles from the nearest paved road and had no signal, no power, nothing but woods and water. I loaded up my Tacoma with a canvas tent, enough food for 4 days, a cooler of water, fishing gear, a .38 revolver I kept more out of habit than need, and a pair of boots I trusted more than anything. I reached the trailhead early in the morning, hiked 4 miles through trees that closed in overhead, and finally reached the bend in the creek where I'd camped before. Everything was just like I remembered it. The slope of the bank, the broken log where I used to sit and fish, and even a rusted tin can stuck halfway in the mud that hadn't moved in all those years. I set up camp quickly. Tent under the biggest cedar, a ring of stones for a fire, and my cooler partly buried under leaves to keep it shaded. I didn't bother with my phone because I knew I wouldn't have signal out here. That was the point. No calls.
No texts.
Just wind in the trees and the smell of pine needles warming in the sun. The first day passed the way I wanted it to. I fished a little, ate jerky and apples, drank cold water straight from the creek after boiling it, and watched dragonflies flick around like sparks. At night, I made a small fire and sat there until the stars came out. I didn't even realize how much noise the city had drilled into me until I felt it all missing. No hum of power lines, no passing cars, just the occasional rustle from animals doing their thing in the underbrush. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel off. I was lying in my tent sometime past midnight, probably closer to 2 in the morning. I hadn't fallen asleep yet. My body was tired, but my mind was still going, stuck thinking about work and everything I was trying to leave behind. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a big noise. It was soft, barely there. But once you're alone in the dark and your ears tune in, you start catching things you wouldn't in daylight. It was a click, like wood snapping under weight. Not close, but not far either. Maybe 30 yards off, deeper in the woods. First, I brushed it off. Could have been a raccoon. Could have been a deer. Could have been anything. Then came another one. Same sound. A single crack, like a dry branch being stepped on. Then another. I sat up in my sleeping bag, zipped the tent halfway down, and looked out. Everything was pitch black beyond the fire pit, which had burned out long ago. I didn't have a lantern on, just my headlamp, and I didn't turn it on yet. I just sat there, listening, trying to place the direction of the sound. My ears were straining so hard they started ringing. Then it stopped, for a while, long enough that I felt stupid for even sitting up. I lay back down, still tense, and stared at the roof of the tent until I drifted off. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I went for a long walk upstream, caught a few brook trout, came back, cooked them with some foil and salt over the fire. I was halfway through dinner when I noticed something odd. There were footprints on the other side of the creek. That side of the creek was thick with brush and uneven terrain. No trails, no reason for anyone to be over there unless they were cutting through off-path. But there they were, shapes pressed into the mud, deep enough to be fresh. 2 sets. Not boots, not paws. Sneakers, maybe. I couldn't make out details from where I was. But they were about the same size as mine. I stood there for a while, chewing the last bite of fish slowly, staring across the water. I didn't like the idea of someone watching me from the brush. I hadn't heard or seen anyone on the hike in, and it wasn't the kind of place folks just stumbled into by accident. I crossed the creek and checked the area, but the ground was too soft and messy to follow anything useful. I didn't find anyone.
No campsite. No trash.
Nothing. That night, I kept the fire going longer than usual. I had the revolver loaded and sitting near my foot. I didn't sleep much. I heard more of those same soft noises again. But this time they stopped and didn't come back. The next morning, something was missing. A coil of rope I'd brought was gone. Just gone. I tied it up on a branch beside the tent in case I needed to hang food or gear. It was a good 20 feet of bright orange paracord, hard to miss. At first I thought maybe I'd packed it away without thinking, but I turned over every bag, every box. It was gone, just like that. I tried to stay calm. I told myself maybe a raccoon had pulled it off or something, but there were no chew marks. The knot had been untied clean, like someone had used their hands. That's when I decided I wouldn't stay another night. I started packing everything up slowly. I figured I'd hike out in the late afternoon, take my time, and be back at the truck by nightfall. But then I noticed something that made me freeze. In the dirt beside the tent, half smudged and shallow, was a footprint, clearer than the ones across the creek. It looked like someone had walked right up to my tent and stood there for a while. I didn't wait. I packed up faster than I ever have in my life. I shoved everything in the bags without folding or organizing. The tent stayed partially collapsed. I just strapped it to my pack, slung everything over my back, and left the fire pit cold. I made it about 1.5 miles before I heard a noise that stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was a whistle. 3 short notes, slow, drawn out, coming from behind me. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, fast, focused, breathing hard but quiet. I didn't run, not yet, because I knew the trail was narrow and twisted. One wrong step and I'd break something or fall. Another whistle, closer, same tune. My hand stayed on the revolver. I could feel it inside the canvas pouch against my thigh. I hadn't drawn it yet, but my fingers were ready. Still, I didn't stop. I just kept going, my boots digging into the dirt, stepping over roots and rocks. Then I heard movement behind me. Real movement. Quick, heavy steps. Like someone jogging to catch up. That's when I started running. I didn't think. I just moved. I tore down that path with everything I had. Heart pounding in my throat. Lungs burning. The forest flew by in a blur of green and brown. I slipped once and hit my knee hard against a root but didn't stop. When I finally reached the trailhead, I could see my truck through the trees. I've never been so relieved to see that dull blue paint in my life. I didn't stop moving until I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed out of that gravel lot faster than I should have. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't care. I drove until I had signal again. I pulled into a gas station 20 miles out, sat in the parking lot, and just sat there breathing. I didn't call anyone. I didn't file a report. What would I say? That someone stalked me in the woods, took my rope, stood at my tent, and followed me whistling? They'd laugh. Or worse, they'd think I imagined it. I never went back to that spot. I told my cousin we needed to do our next camping trip closer to home, near populated areas. I still camp sometimes, but I don't go alone. Not anymore. What stuck with me most wasn't the noise or the footprint, or even the missing rope. It was the whistle. 3 slow notes. Not a song. Not anything I recognized. Just a sound. Pattern. Like they wanted me to know they were there. Like they wanted me to remember. And I do. I remember every time I close my eyes. I was 32 when I finally decided to take a break from my job in Sao Paulo. I'd been working at a logistics firm for almost 10 years, the kind of place where you're inside an office with no windows for 12 hours a day. I was tired, burnt out. That's what my doctor said too, when I went in for a checkup after getting dizzy on the metro. He said I needed fresh air, nature, and time away from screens. So I decided to take a solo camping trip. Most people would go to the coast or somewhere safe and simple. I wanted the opposite. I wanted real distance from everything, something wild. I booked a flight to Manaus and planned to camp alone for 2 weeks in a less traveled part of the Amazon rainforest. Not deep jungle survival, but far enough away from tour guides and backpacker routes. I flew into Manaus, bought gear from a local shop, tent, hammock, water filters, lightweight food packets, and a machete, and took a small boat west along the Rio Negro. From there, I was dropped off near a smaller river called Igarape do Castanho. The boatman looked a bit confused when I pointed to where I wanted to be let off, but I told him I had a GPS and a map. I had researched the area, low population, some wildlife, but no dangerous tribes or drug activity reported in years. My plan was to hike and drift westward through the jungle for a few days, setting up camp along the riverbanks, and then loop back in a wide arc to meet a different boatman I'd scheduled ahead of time. He'd be waiting 2 weeks later near a small wooden dock closer to a village. I told him if I didn't show, he should call the authorities. I thought that covered my bases. At the time, I felt smart about it. The first few days were like something from a dream. Thick trees stretched high above me like green walls. Every part of the forest moved and breathed. I saw toucans, howler monkeys, tapirs, and even a small jaguar in the distance. At night, I hung my hammock between trees, strung a mosquito net, and listened to the jungle hum and whistle. By day 4, I was deeper into the rainforest than I'd ever imagined I'd go. The undergrowth was thicker, the trails harder to follow. I had to rely more on the compass and less on the map because even the satellite images I printed were out of date. But I felt good. I was sweating out years of stress. My body hurt in a good way. It was on day 5 that something changed. I'd found an opening in the forest where I could set up my tent, an area where tall palm trees gave way to a flatter, more open patch near the river. The soil was sandy, and it looked like it had flooded at some point, but was dry now. I pitched my tent on slightly raised ground and went to gather wood. That's when I found the footprints. They were fresh. At first, I thought maybe someone else had come through recently, a local fisherman maybe. But the size of the prints was what stuck with me. They were barefoot, wide and flat with long toes, but larger than mine. Not by a huge amount, maybe one size up, but there was something odd about them. They didn't seem right. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of water splashing. I peeked out and saw nothing, but the wet sand near the riverbank was disturbed. New prints. Again, no shoes. I felt my stomach tighten. There was no way someone could have walked by without me hearing. I'm a light sleeper when I camp. Plus, the jungle floor is loud with snapping branches and leaves. I packed up and moved. No real reason to panic. I told myself maybe there were locals foraging or passing through quietly, but I didn't sleep well that night. By day 7, I was far off the route I planned. My compass worked, but I was drifting westward slower than I'd expected. Rain had turned paths into thick mud, and I'd gotten caught once trying to cross a shallow stream that ended up waist deep. That was when I saw something again. Just after sunset, as I was hanging my hammock between 2 trees, I looked up and saw someone, or something, standing maybe 30 meters away, almost hidden behind the trees. Not moving, just standing. I froze. I didn't have a gun, just the machete. I waited for a minute or two, not breathing much. Then I blinked, and the figure was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of light, but I packed up and moved again. That night, I didn't hang the hammock. I just crawled into the tent and kept the machete close to my chest. The noises in the jungle were different that night. It was subtle but real. Less animal calls, less frog croaking, more rustling. I heard soft movements around the tent, twigs breaking, water swishing, and something brushing the fabric gently. I didn't sleep. The next day, I found new footprints near the tent. Multiple sets now, at least 3, all barefoot. The prints moved in circles, almost like pacing. One set stopped right beside the tent. My stomach dropped when I saw it. I could picture someone standing silently beside me while I was lying inside, just inches from my head. I moved again, this time fast. I barely ate or rested. I kept walking west, trying to find a stream that would lead me toward the pickup point early. I wanted to cut the trip short, but the jungle didn't care. It was thick and winding and made me fight for every step. My legs were covered in cuts and insect bites. On day 9, I found something that made my skin go cold. I was walking through a narrow ravine between two ridges when I saw something nailed to a tree. It was a shirt, faded red, covered in mold, tied tightly to the trunk. Beneath it were 2 plastic bottles hanging by string, clinking in the wind. Inside the bottles were dead insects and scraps of what looked like paper or cloth. There were symbols scratched into the tree bark. I don't know what they meant. Not writing, but shapes, circles, lines, a shape that looked like an eye. It wasn't natural. It wasn't tribal art either. I've seen enough of that in books. This felt recent and deliberate. It made my hands shake. I didn't touch it. I just turned and kept walking, pushing until my feet felt like they'd break. That night, I didn't camp. I just kept moving by moonlight, using a headlamp only when I had to. I could hear something behind me, not close, but not far either. A low shuffling, sometimes twigs breaking, always just far enough away that I couldn't see. But I knew something was there. I don't remember how many hours I walked, maybe 10. I stumbled a few times and gashed my knee. I used strips of shirt to wrap it. My water filter cracked that night when I dropped my bag. I had to start boiling water after that. On the morning of day 10, I found a torn backpack hanging in a tree. It looked like mine but older, sun-bleached and rotting. Inside were 2 food wrappers, a cracked compass, and a torn sleeping bag. I didn't know what to make of it. There was no note, no ID,
No bones.
just the backpack. It wasn't covered in vines or leaves, so it hadn't been there long. That was when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't the first. The final stretch of the trip is a blur. I kept moving, barely sleeping, drinking brown boiled water, and chewing on dry rice and crackers. On the 13th day, I finally found a wide part of the river that matched the map. I followed it south and found the wooden dock. The boatman was already there, smoking a cigarette, looking around like he'd been waiting too long. I didn't say anything. I climbed in, sat down, and stared at the trees as we drifted away. I noticed his eyes on me a few times. He didn't speak either. Maybe he saw something in my face. Back in Manaus, I checked into a hotel and slept for almost a day straight. When I woke up, I went to the police station just to ask if any campers had gone missing in that region. The man behind the desk shrugged. He said people go missing all the time in the forest. He didn't take any report. I flew home the next day. I quit my job 2 months later. I couldn't stand being in the office anymore. I moved to a small town by the coast and took a part-time job delivering supplies to boatyards. Quiet life. I don't talk about the trip. Not really. People wouldn't get it. They'd ask why I didn't take pictures, why I didn't call for help. They'd say I was being paranoid. They'd try to explain it away. But sometimes, when I'm walking near the trees just before dark, I still feel that same weight in my chest, like something watching just out of sight, quiet, waiting. I still have that torn compass. I keep it in a drawer by my bed. Sometimes I take it out and just look at it. I've never gone back to the jungle, and I never will. It was the summer of 2016, and I had just turned 32. My name is Daniel Ross. I lived in Southern Oregon back then, worked a warehouse job during the week, and on weekends I liked to get away from everything. I didn't care much for city noise, traffic, or crowds. I liked the quiet, the type of quiet you only get far out in the woods, where the only thing you hear is the breeze through the trees and the sound of your boots on dirt. I had recently heard about a place called Copper Ridge from a guy I worked with. He said it wasn't an official campsite, just a patch of land near the Cascade Range where you could pitch a tent and not see another soul for days. That sounded perfect to me. He gave me rough directions, nothing precise, just a general area north of Prospect. I loaded up my Jeep that Friday afternoon with enough food for a few days. A small tent, a rifle, and my old hiking pack. I left town around 3 p.m. and drove for hours through winding mountain roads. The further I got, the narrower and bumpier the roads became. Eventually, I was on little more than a dirt trail. It wasn't marked on my GPS. That was fine, I wanted remote. The road twisted upward along a ridgeline. Pine trees on both sides, the kind that crowd in close and cast long shadows even in daylight. I found a decent clearing around 7 p.m., maybe 2 miles past a half-collapsed wooden bridge. There was a flat patch of dirt surrounded by trees, not far from a steep drop into a valley below. You could see for miles from the edge. There were no signs of anyone having camped there before. No fire pits, no trash, no tracks. That made it even better. I parked the Jeep between 2 trees, set up my tent, and unrolled my sleeping bag. I got a fire going before the sun dipped too low, and I cooked up some sausages I'd brought in a cooler. The first night was peaceful. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. I didn't sleep great, though. Around midnight, I heard something walking through the brush a ways off. Slow, deliberate crunches. I figured it was a deer or maybe a fox. Still, I kept my rifle within arm's reach. That's just how I was raised, be prepared. The noise faded eventually, and I drifted off. The second day started like any other solo camping trip. I ate a couple protein bars, made instant coffee over the fire, and took a slow walk around the area. The ridge dropped steeply behind my tent. Beyond that was nothing but dense pine forest. No sign of other people anywhere. No wrappers, no shell casings, no noise from cars or ATVs. Felt like I was the last person on Earth. But as the day went on, a few small things started bothering me. I went to collect firewood about 100 yards from camp and noticed a small pile of rocks stacked neatly beside a tree. 3 flat stones, each slightly smaller than the one below it, like a little tower. Something about it felt off. It wasn't natural, and it didn't look like it had been there long. The moss underneath was still green and flat where the rocks had pressed down. I pushed the pile over with my boot. No big deal. Kids make rock stacks all the time. Maybe a hunter passed through here once. When I got back to camp that afternoon, I noticed a long scratch down the side of the Jeep. It hadn't been there the night before. It wasn't from a branch, it looked like it had been done on purpose. A single line about 3 feet long, deep enough to cut through the paint. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise outside the tent made me sit up, heart pounding. I didn't hear footsteps this time, but I kept thinking I saw movement through the trees when I looked out. Once, around 3 a.m., I swore I saw a figure. Not close, just a shadow between the trees. I stayed perfectly still for nearly an hour, rifle across my lap, breathing through my nose to keep quiet. Morning finally came and I stepped outside. Everything looked normal at first, but I felt like the woods were holding their breath. Even the birds were quiet. I walked around the perimeter of my camp, rifle in hand, looking for tracks or any sign of someone passing through. I found nothing. I was starting to think I'd imagined it, that maybe I was just on edge from being alone out here too long. But then I noticed something else. The pile of rocks I'd kicked over the day before, there was a new one. Not in the same spot. This one was closer, just 30 feet from the tent. Same setup, 3 rocks, same neat stack. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't touch it this time. I just walked back to the fire pit, sat down and thought. I didn't want to panic. Could still be nothing, a coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I didn't eat much that day. My appetite was gone. I spent most of the afternoon cleaning up the camp and deciding if I should leave. By dusk, I'd made up my mind to go first thing in the morning. I didn't want to drive those roads in the dark. One wrong move and I'd be off a cliff. But I kept everything packed except the tent, ready to throw it all in the Jeep at first light. The third night was the worst. I lay awake in the tent, no fire burning. just darkness and silence. Around midnight, I heard something again. Not footsteps, not this time. It sounded like someone dragging their hand across the fabric of the tent. A slow, steady scrape along one side. I froze. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't even reach for the rifle right away. I just listened. The sound circled the tent, slow, deliberate. Then it stopped. I sat there in the dark for what felt like forever, clutching the rifle in both hands, eyes wide. When I finally dared to unzip the flap and look out, I saw nothing. No shapes, no lights, nothing moving. But the rocks were back again. Another stack, this time only 10 feet away, right by where the Jeep had been parked. I didn't sleep. I sat by the tent with the rifle until the sky started turning gray. The second I could see well enough to drive, I threw everything into the back of the Jeep, yanked the tent poles from the ground, and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop for anything. Not for water, not to eat. I didn't even check the map. I just followed the dirt trail back down the mountain. A few miles out, I passed the collapsed bridge again. That's when I noticed something new. Spray painted on one of the trees near the path, bright orange, was a word, stay. I never saw it on the way in. It looked fresh. The paint hadn't faded or cracked. There were no other markings, just that one word, staring me down as I passed. I didn't stop to take a picture. I just kept going. Once I got to a proper road again and had cell signal, I pulled over and checked the back of the Jeep. Nothing was missing, but there was a second scratch on the other side just like the first one. Same length, same depth. I got home around noon, locked my door, and didn't go outside for the rest of the day. I couldn't stop thinking about that ridge, the rocks, the sound around my tent. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time, not even the guy who told me about the place. A few months later, I went back on Google Earth and tried to pinpoint where I'd camped. I couldn't find it. The road I'd taken didn't show up on satellite view. No trail markers, no clearings, nothing. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I didn't, because I still have the Jeep, and those scratches are still there. I've gone camping since then, plenty of times, but never that far out and never alone again. I still think about Copper Ridge sometimes, not the piece of it, not the view. I think about those rocks. I think about the sound of something circling my tent. And most of all, I think about whoever or whatever left that message by the bridge. Stay. I didn't, and I never will. It was in the summer of 2009. I was 33 years old and working construction out in the rural parts of Yorkshire, England. I'd been based mostly near the outskirts of Leeds for a few years, but I'd been given a short break from work and decided to go camping to clear my head. Things weren't really bad, just noisy. Too many voices around me all the time, coworkers talking over one another, machines humming, phones ringing. I needed some quiet. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, and never really enjoyed holidays like most people. I wasn't into beaches or hotels or even city breaks. I liked the woods. I liked the rain. I liked the sound of wind pressing through the leaves. That kind of quiet. So I packed my kit, a green canvas tent, my sleeping bag, my old gas stove, a kettle, a pack of canned soup, a few odds and ends. I didn't bring my phone. Back then, I had one of those older ones anyway, the kind with physical buttons. I figured I wouldn't need it. I picked a small wooded area in the North York Moors. It wasn't an official campsite or anything, just a patch of forest that backed onto a farmer's field. I'd driven past it a few months before and remembered thinking it looked like a good spot to disappear for a bit. There weren't any signs saying to keep out.
No fences.
Just a thin gravel pull-off and a winding path that dropped into a grove surrounded by pine and birch trees. It was late June when I drove out. The sky was dull gray the whole afternoon. A bit of drizzle started up on the way there, but I didn't mind. I actually liked camping in the rain. Less people, fewer chances of hearing cars or music or shouting kids. I had my thick rain jacket, waterproof boots, the works. I was ready. I parked my car at the gravel edge, locked it, slung my pack over one shoulder, and walked down into the grove. The air was wet and earthy. Moss-covered stones poked through the grass. The trees here grew closely together, thick branches arching like ribs overhead. After about 10 minutes of walking, I found a flat patch of ground tucked between a tall pine and a thick patch of ferns. Perfect. No one could see me from the road, even if they tried. I set up my tent, drove the pegs deep, rolled out my sleeping bag, and sat outside for a while, listening. Nothing, just the soft patter of rain hitting leaves. Felt like exactly what I needed. By the time I lit my gas stove and boiled water for a cup of tea, the sky was already darkening. Rain picked up a little around 8 p.m., falling in heavier sheets. I pulled the rain flap over the tent entrance and crawled inside, just sitting there in the orange glow of my flashlight for a while. I wasn't tired, just still. It was peaceful. I could hear the wind moving over the ridge above the grove, making the trees creak and sway. Nothing unusual. Eventually, around 9:30, I laid down and zipped my bag halfway up. I could still hear the rain tapping the tent. I remember thinking how dry and warm I felt. The outside world could drown in rain for all I cared. I was in my own little cave. That feeling didn't last long. Around 11, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The rain hadn't stopped, and it didn't sound any heavier. There wasn't any thunder, no wind howling, just that steady beat of droplets on canvas. But something was off. I laid there for a few seconds, blinking into the darkness, and realized I wasn't hearing just the rain anymore. There was something else, a sound I couldn't place at first. Faint, dull, like a low scrape or a thud. I held my breath and listened. There it was again, closer now. It wasn't the rhythm of water falling or wind moving trees. It was heavier, like weight shifting on wet ground. A soft crack of a twig, then another. Not animals, those sounds were different. Lighter, quicker. This was slow, deliberate. Someone was out there. I didn't move at first. I just stayed still in my bag, heart thumping hard now. I turned my head slightly and reached for the small knife I always kept inside my pack. It wasn't much, just a 3-inch fold-out blade, but it was something. I didn't want to unzip the tent, didn't want to shine my light. That would give me away. The sound stopped. I couldn't hear anything but rain again. A few minutes passed. I waited. Nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just a branch falling or something in my dream slipping into my waking brain. I kept telling myself that over and over, but I didn't believe it. Not really. I stayed awake, eyes wide open, for over an hour. I heard nothing else. Eventually, my body gave in. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. I woke again just after 2 in the morning. The rain was louder, heavier now, a constant roar on the tent roof. But this time, I knew right away what had woken me. The tent wasn't still. It was shaking, not wildly, just small, twitching motions, like fingers brushing against the outer fabric. My first thought was wind, but then I noticed that the trees weren't moving like they should have if it had been gusting. And wind didn't make brushing sounds. It didn't tap the tent like that. I could hear it, a light flick of something against the canvas, moving from one side to the other. I reached for my flashlight. I turned it on, and the glow lit the inside of the tent pale yellow. But I didn't unzip the flap. I didn't want to see what was out there. I just sat, frozen, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other. The brushing stopped. Then I heard footsteps again, this time clearly, right outside. Slow.
Vet.
Heavy. They circled the tent once. Then again. I wanted to scream but didn't. I wanted to leap out, shine the light, swing the knife, do something. But I stayed inside, hiding, like a child. Every instinct told me not to go out there. The steps eventually moved away. I waited at least 30 minutes before unzipping the flap just a few inches. Rain came in sideways, blowing across my face, cold and sharp. I pointed the flashlight out but saw nothing, just dripping trees and black shapes. No one. I didn't sleep again. I waited, sitting up in my sleeping bag until morning. When the rain lightened just a little and the sky turned gray, I packed everything fast, pulled up the stakes, stuffed the bag, crushed the tent into my rucksack, and walked straight back to the road. But when I got there, my car wasn't how I left it. There were handprints on the windows, not muddy, but clear where the rain had been wiped away by skin. Fingers had pressed against the glass, on all 4 doors, on the boot, even on the windscreen. Someone had been trying to see inside. That's when my legs nearly gave out. Not during the night, not when I heard the steps, not when the tent shook, but standing there in the weak daylight, looking at my own car like it didn't belong to me anymore. I unlocked the door and sat inside for a long time before starting the engine. The windows fogged up around me as I stared at the raindrops sliding across the windscreen, tracing the places where fingers had dragged down the glass. I never went back to that grove. I told myself I wouldn't camp alone again, especially not in places that remote. But I broke that rule eventually. A few years later, I went out again, different woods, different time, different season. Nothing happened, but I always think about that night. I still can't explain it. Maybe it was just some local messing around. Maybe someone knew I was down there and decided to scare me. But that doesn't add up. Why didn't they say anything? Why just circle the tent? Why leave without taking anything? Why touch the car? I moved cities the next year, found work elsewhere. I still sleep badly when it rains too hard. Something about that constant beat on the windows makes me feel like I'm still in that tent, still waiting for the brushing to start again. I was 27 that year. I had just gone through a rough stretch, nothing dramatic, just the slow, suffocating kind of stress that builds up when you spend too long in the same flat, working the same job and seeing the same streets. I'd been living in Nottingham since I was 20, working as a tech support agent in a tiny office with flickering lights and a microwave that always smelled like burnt beans. It was July 2016 when I decided I needed to get away from everything. I didn't want hotels. I didn't want people. I didn't want Wi-Fi or restaurants or anyone asking how I was doing. I wanted silence. So I packed up my old Vauxhall Astra with a tent, a sleeping bag, and a cooler full of food, and I drove north until I crossed into Derbyshire, where the trees grew thicker and the towns got smaller and quieter. I stopped in a village called Hartcliffe. There wasn't much there, just a few homes, a boarded-up petrol station, and a pub that only opened twice a week. The plan was to camp near a place I'd read about online, an old abandoned quarry about 2 miles from the village. It wasn't on any official maps anymore, but a guy on a hiking forum had written about camping there and said it was perfect, flat ground, thick woods, and no one for miles. I parked by a narrow dirt track just before sunset and hiked in. It took me about 40 minutes to reach the quarry, and by the time I got there, the sky was going orange and pink behind the trees. The place was just as the guy described. A wide, flat clearing surrounded by tall cliffs on 3 sides. The floor was covered in grass and moss, with a few scattered rocks and old wooden beams half swallowed by the earth. It looked like no one had touched it in years. I set up my tent near the cliff wall, out of view from the track I came in on. Felt quiet, still, the way I wanted it. That first night, I sat by my little stove, cooked some sausages, and watched the sky go dark. No phone signal.
No noise.
just the wind and the distant rustling of leaves. It was exactly what I'd been hoping for, but that calm didn't last. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of twigs snapping. It wasn't close, sounded maybe 50 feet away, deep in the trees behind my tent. I sat up and listened. After a minute, it stopped. I figured it was a deer or maybe a fox, so I didn't think much of it. I made coffee and walked around the quarry a bit. The cliffs were steep, maybe 30 feet tall, and thick with ivy. You could tell the place had been abandoned for decades. Rusted metal brackets stuck out of the rock, and there were deep grooves worn into the stone from old machinery. A little pool had formed in the lowest part of the quarry floor, where rain had collected. Around noon, I went for a walk up the hill behind the quarry to get a better view of the landscape. I climbed through a patch of dense trees and found a narrow ledge that gave me a view over the top of the quarry. You could see the whole area, my tent, the pool, and even the trail I'd come in on. And that's when I saw something strange. There was a man standing near the trailhead, just where the trees opened up into the quarry. He was tall, wearing what looked like a dark green coat, and he wasn't moving. He was just standing there, facing the quarry, not me. I watched him for maybe 30 seconds. He didn't shift or look around, just stood still like he was carved from wood. It made me uneasy, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe another hiker. Maybe he was just looking around. Maybe he hadn't even seen my tent. So I climbed back down and tried to shake it off. But later that night, I noticed something else. Around 10, when it was fully dark and I was zipped up in my tent, I heard something again. Footsteps, this time slower, heavier, coming from the trees behind me. I didn't move. I just lay still and listened. They stopped after a few seconds. I opened the tent flap and looked out, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the black trees swaying in the breeze. I didn't sleep well that night. By the third day, I started feeling like I was being watched. I kept noticing little things. The way birds would suddenly go quiet. The way twigs would snap once and then never again. I started taking short walks just to check the area, but I never saw anyone. That afternoon, I walked the same path back to the ledge to get reception and check for any emergency messages. I held up my phone, trying to catch a bar, and while I was standing there, I looked down at the quarry again. There was a shape near my tent. At first, I thought it was a tree stump or a pile of clothes, but then it moved just a little, like someone shifting their weight. It was the same man, same coat, standing by the tent. I didn't move. I just watched. He walked slowly around the tent once, not touching anything, just moving in a wide circle. Then he stood still again, and after a minute, he walked off into the trees. I waited almost half an hour before going back down. When I returned to camp, nothing was missing. Nothing was touched, but there were footprints in the dirt. Big ones, heavy. They circled the tent exactly as I'd seen. I wanted to leave, but it was already too late in the day. The trail was narrow and I didn't want to hike it in the dark. So I kept a flashlight and my knife with me that night and barely slept at all. Every sound outside made my chest tighten. I kept thinking I'd see his silhouette through the tent wall, just standing there again. At sunrise, I started packing. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee, just folded everything as fast as I could. I kept looking up at the trees, expecting to see him again. I couldn't shake the feeling he was still out there, watching. I strapped my pack and started heading down the trail. About 20 minutes into the walk, I noticed something odd. A fresh tree branch had been broken and laid across the trail like a marker. I stepped over it and kept going. Then another one about 100 feet later, and another, each one bent at an angle and placed carefully. It didn't feel random. It felt like something was being shown to me. I sped up, gripping my walking stick tighter. The trail felt longer than before. The forest felt too quiet. No wind,
No birds.
just my own footsteps crunching the earth. When I reached the car, I felt a wave of relief until I saw what was on the hood. A dead crow, wings spread out. Its neck was twisted sharply to the side, and its eyes were gone. It had been placed there, right in the center of the bonnet. I didn't touch it. I didn't say anything. I just got in the car, locked the doors, and drove off. Back in Nottingham, I tried to make sense of it. I told myself it could have been anything. Some local messing with me, a hunter, a madman, or maybe I was just overreacting after being alone too long. Maybe the guy never even saw me. Maybe the dead bird was some weird coincidence. But 2 nights later, as I was unloading the last of my camping gear from the boot, I found something wedged between the floor mat and the side panel, a folded piece of damp paper. I unfolded it, and written in thick, uneven letters were the words, "You left something behind." No name.
No signature.
Just that. I didn't go back to the woods again after that. I sold the camping gear within the week and didn't tell anyone the full story. Even now, almost 10 years later, I still don't understand what that man wanted. He never spoke. He never chased me. He just watched. But sometimes, when I walk home late at night, I catch myself looking over my shoulder. Not because I think I'll see him again, because part of me believes I never really left that quarry. Not fully. And maybe he didn't either. I was 32 the year I drove out to Copper Ridge, Arizona on my own to try and clear my head. It was 2016. I had gone through a nasty breakup a few months before, and things at work were only getting worse. I worked in real estate, but I hated it. I hated the office, the fake smiles, the long hours, the calls at dinner. I had been grinding away for 8 years, and I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. So when I told my boss I needed some time off or I'd quit, he didn't even blink. He just told me to take a week, maybe 2, and get myself straight. I didn't know where to go at first. I just started driving west from Tulsa in my old Ford Explorer. I'd packed a tent, a cooler, some gear I'd picked up cheap from a friend who'd stopped hiking after he had kids. I brought a knife, bear spray, and a rusted .38 I kept locked in a small gun safe under the driver's seat. I wasn't really expecting to need it. I'd never used it before and barely took it out. It was more for peace of mind than anything else. By the time I got to Arizona, I was running low on food and gas, but I wasn't ready to go back. I liked the feeling of being far away. I'd spent a night just outside Flagstaff, parked behind some trees near a dry creek. I didn't sleep well that night. There were coyotes howling and something knocked over my water jug, but I figured it was a raccoon or something like that. A day later, I came across a worn wooden sign for Copper Ridge Wilderness. It was a patch of BLM land out past the maintained roads. The dirt track leading to the ridge was narrow, filled with loose rocks, and it scraped the bottom of my SUV more than once, but I was stubborn. I kept driving until I found a flat area that looked like a good spot to camp. It was isolated. There were no cell towers, no traffic noises, nothing but tall yellow grass, stunted pines, and those strange reddish cliffs in the distance that shimmered in the heat. I set up my tent just off the tree line. From where I stood, I could see the ridge itself rising up in layers of dusty rock. There were no other cars, no campers, no signs that anyone had been there in a long time. That's what I wanted, silence. The first night was peaceful. I made some instant noodles, drank a couple beers, and sat by a small fire I dug into a shallow pit. The air cooled fast after sundown, and I wrapped up in a hoodie and just stared up at the stars. I don't think I'd ever seen a sky so wide or so full. No planes, no city glow, just space. I felt small, but in a good way, like maybe all the crap I'd been carrying didn't matter as much as I thought. I slept hard that night. I woke up around 6 to the sound of birds and some rustling in the grass, probably deer or jackrabbits. I walked a bit, explored the edge of the ridge, and saw some deep animal tracks along the dried creek bed nearby. They looked like mountain lion, but it was hard to tell. I didn't think too much about it. That second day passed slow. I read a bit, took some photos with my old DSLR, even tried sketching the rocks. I barely ate, just a protein bar and some jerky. Around dusk, I heard something strange. It was like metal clinking, not constant, but enough to catch my attention. I figured it was maybe wind against my camp gear, but nothing was swinging or loose. The air was still. I stood for a while, listening. The sound didn't come again, so I let it go. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt off. It was too quiet. I know that sounds strange, but if you've spent time alone in nature, you know what I mean. Normally there's bugs, frogs, distant animals. But that night, it was like everything was holding its breath. Then I heard footsteps. Not animal, too heavy, crunching slow through the gravel and dry brush, maybe 20 or 30 feet away from my tent. My body went cold. I stayed still.
No flashlight.
No movement, just listened. Whoever it was, they didn't say anything. They just walked slowly, circling. At one point, I heard them stop right behind the tent, so close I could hear their breathing. Slow, steady, then nothing. I must have stayed frozen for an hour. I didn't hear them leave, didn't hear a vehicle, didn't hear any more footsteps. When the sun came up, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. I looked around the clearing. No sign of anyone.
No boot prints.
No broken branches. Nothing moved. I started to wonder if I imagined it. Maybe it had been an animal after all. I tried to convince myself that, but that third day something changed. I walked further out toward the ridge, trying to distract myself. Maybe 10 minutes from camp, I found a small pile of rocks. At first I thought it was natural, but the stones were stacked, carefully, balanced. There were thin wooden sticks wedged between the layers like a kind of marker. I'd seen cairns before. This wasn't one of those. It looked more like a warning. I walked back to camp slowly. I didn't want to stay another night, but it was late. I didn't want to navigate that rocky road in the dark. I decided to leave at first light. I packed my stuff tight, kept the knife nearby, and zipped the tent shut. At around 1 in the morning, I woke up to a clicking sound. It was like someone tapping metal against stone. Then I heard the footsteps again, this time quicker. Not running, but pacing. And then, the tent shook. Not hard, just one side like someone grabbed a corner and tugged it once. I didn't move, couldn't. I heard breathing again, right at the flap. I finally reached for my flashlight and my revolver at the same time, heart thudding in my throat. I yanked the zipper down and shone the beam out. Nothing, just trees and dark. But when I turned to the left, I saw something about 50 feet away. A man, I think, though I couldn't make out a face. He was standing perfectly still at the edge of the tree line, just far enough that the light didn't hit his face, but close enough I could see the shape of his body. He wore something like a coat, maybe a parka or a long jacket, and he didn't move. I aimed the flashlight right at him. He didn't flinch, just stood there. I shouted. I didn't care if I was alone. I was terrified. I yelled something like, "Get the hell out of here," and I raised the revolver. But he didn't respond. After a few seconds, he just turned and walked slowly into the trees. I didn't sleep after that. I packed up everything in the dark, threw it in the back of the SUV, and waited. Engine running. The sun came up slow, and I drove out the second I could see clearly. The rocks scraped my undercarriage worse than before, but I didn't stop. I drove for 3 hours before I got to a diner near Winslow. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days, and I must have looked awful. I went in, washed up, and sat in a booth. There was a retired park ranger eating alone across from me. I asked him casually if many people camped in Copper Ridge. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Not really. Place creeps people out. Lot of old stories." Weird stuff. I asked what kind of stories. He just shrugged and said, people going missing. Couple years back, someone found an old bunker or shack out there. Boarded up. Ranger patrol opened it, found old clothes inside. Strange gear. Nobody claimed it. I asked where exactly that was. He said it was near the north side of the ridge. That was exactly where I'd camped. I didn't say anything else. I left soon after and drove back toward Oklahoma. I didn't go back to work right away. I told them I was sick. I didn't leave the house much. For weeks, I kept checking over my shoulder. I stopped camping. I sold the gear, sold the revolver too. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up and swear I heard that same metal clicking sound outside my apartment window, though I lived on the second floor. I haven't gone back to Arizona since. To this day, I don't know who that man was. I don't know if he lived out there, or if he was just passing through or hunting or something worse. I try not to think about it too much, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I know I'm never going back to Copper Ridge. I was 31 years old when it happened. It was early autumn in 2017, and I had been doing solo camping trips around the UK for about 5 years by then. I'd done the lakes, parts of Scotland, Yorkshire, even some quieter corners in Norfolk. I loved the silence, the routine, the little victories like finding the perfect spot or starting a fire with damp wood. Most of all, I liked being alone. That trip to Wales wasn't planned too far ahead. I just felt stuck 1 week. Work had slowed down, I was working in private landscaping, and I needed air. I looked at the forecast on a Tuesday night, saw that it was dry for the next 4 or 5 days, and threw my stuff in the back of my Hilux the next morning. I drove out from Telford around 6 a.m. and took the back roads as much as possible. I knew I wanted somewhere a little more remote, nothing touristy. I'd heard from a guy at a pub a year earlier about the hills east of Dalgelo. He'd said there were old sheep grazing areas that had grown wild again. Less traffic, fewer families. That's exactly what I was looking for. I followed a route he roughly described and pulled into a dirt levee around midday. The last bit of the road was a mess. Crumbling edges and thick moss up the middle, but it felt right. I loaded up my pack, tent, food, tools, everything I needed and walked in. The first mile was just thick woods and gradual slope. Then it opened out into a clearing shaped like a stretched oval, surrounded by hills and broken stone walls that were older than any house I'd ever worked on. It looked like the land had once been lived in but was left to rot. I picked a spot near one of the walls where the trees weren't too thick but still offered some shelter from the wind. You wouldn't see the tent from any road, not even from a drone if it came overhead. It was perfect. I spent the first day doing what I always did, setting up camp, making a fire circle with rocks, clearing small branches, filtering water from a small stream I found running near the north edge of the clearing. The air was still, dead quiet, and not even the usual buzz of insects. That should have stuck out more, but I didn't think twice about it then. I was just glad to be away from everything. That night I didn't light a fire, just cooked over a small gas burner and read a bit with a headlamp on. I went to bed around 9 p.m., dozing off to the sound of wind moving gently through the trees. No weird feelings, no reason to think anything was wrong. The first strange thing happened the next morning. I woke up around 6, opened the tent flap, and noticed fresh prints in the dirt about 10 feet from the tent. They weren't boot prints. They looked almost like bare feet, but wrong. The toes were long, almost stretched, and the arch was high like something walking more on the balls of its feet than the heel. They came from the west, moved around my tent in a slow arc, and disappeared back into the brush. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a badger? But they were too clean and human-shaped. I didn't panic. I'm not the panicking type. I just made a note of it. Could have been some barefoot hiker. People do strange things, especially in the woods, but it didn't sit right. I walked about 50 feet out in every direction, looking for more signs, broken twigs, dragged feet, anything, but I found nothing. The ground was soft enough to leave prints, and yet those were the only ones. I brushed them over with pine needles and ash from the burner, ate a quick breakfast, and went walking for the day. I hiked uphill to the ridge above the clearing and took photos. It was stunning up there, layers of forest and moorland rolling out in every direction. I sat with my back against a boulder and ate lunch while I scanned the landscape. I didn't see another soul. On my way back, around 5 p.m., I noticed something hanging from a branch about 10 feet above ground. It was a small animal, probably a rabbit, skinned and tied by its back legs with a bit of vine or string. It dangled stiffly, blood dried into its fur around the neck and belly. The skin had been removed with care, like someone knew what they were doing. It wasn't clawed or ripped. I stood under it for a while, then kept walking. I didn't take it down. Something in me didn't want to touch it. Back at camp, I tried to act like it didn't bother me. I cooked dinner, kept a knife on my belt, and lit a small fire for the first time since arriving. I sat with my back to a tree, watching the glow flicker against the wall of trees. Still no sounds, not even owls. That unnatural silence started pressing down harder. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels hollow. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 a.m., I heard something moving slowly outside the tent. It wasn't walking in a straight line. It would move, stop, circle, then move again. I froze in my sleeping bag, knife in hand, not daring to breathe too loudly. The thing brushed against the side of the tent once. Just a light touch like a hand, not claws. I stayed frozen for over an hour before the sounds faded. Even then, I waited until the light started to creep back through the mesh window before I moved. In the morning, I stepped out and checked the area. Same strange prints, again in a half circle, like the thing had been watching. This time, though, I found something else. A strip of fabric nailed to a tree. It was about the size of a bandana and soaked with something dark. It looked like blood, but dry and flaky. The nail was old and rusty and bent halfway through. I was done pretending at that point. I packed most of my gear and kept only what I needed to make a quick walk back to the truck the next morning. I didn't want to hike out in darkness. I figured one more night, then gone. I didn't eat. I didn't start a fire. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back to the tent wall, holding the knife and flashlight, listening. Sometime past midnight, I saw it. Not clearly, not like a movie or some horror story where it jumps out of the bushes. I saw it moving between trees about 40 feet away, just at the edge of where the moonlight reached. It was tall, wrong in the way it held its limbs. It moved like it wasn't used to walking, like it was still figuring it out. It stopped often, stood totally still, then darted a few feet like it had seen something, then froze again. I wanted to believe it was a person. I tried every way to convince myself it was, but the way it moved, the way it tracked, it wasn't right. It wasn't curious. It was rehearsing, like it had done this before, like it had walked around campsites enough to learn something. Then slowly it crouched. Its legs folded the wrong way, backwards like a dog's hind legs. I saw it rest its weight on the balls of its feet and lean forward, tilting its head side to side, just watching. I could make out the shape of the head. It looked human, but stretched long at the bottom like the jaw hung lower than it should. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I stayed like that for hours. At some point, I passed out from exhaustion. I woke with light seeping through the tent and my neck stiff from the way I had been hunched. I stepped out fast, scanned the tree line, and started walking. I didn't even eat breakfast. I got back to the truck in under an hour, faster than I had any right to, considering the terrain. I drove until I reached a petrol station, bought food I didn't eat, and sat in the car shaking. I told myself I wasn't going to report it. Who would I even tell? There's no law against being in the woods. But something made me stop at a ranger's office near Mackinac. I didn't say what I saw. I just asked if there were any unusual hikers in the area, any problems, missing people, squatters. The guy behind the desk didn't even hesitate. He said people pass through, but most keep moving. Then he asked if I camped up near the old sheep stations. I nodded. He paused. Then he said, "That part's been funny for a few years. Locals don't go up that way anymore." I didn't ask why. I got back in my truck and didn't stop until I was home. I didn't unpack for 2 days. The tent stayed in the garage for nearly a year. Even now, I won't camp alone anymore. I still hike, still take long walks in quiet places. But when the sun starts dropping, I'm back in the car. People like to talk about monsters and myths, give names to the things they can't explain. I don't. Whatever I saw out there, it wasn't a ghost or a spirit or a shapeshifter out of a legend. It was something real, something that lives out in the woods and waits. It learns. It watches. It doesn't need to chase you because it knows you'll come back eventually. I won't. Not again. Not ever. I was 31 when I took that hunting trip in northern Idaho. It was late October 2009. The trees were already bare in the Panhandle forests, and the cold rolled through the hills like a slow breath. I had planned the trip for months. I'd saved up for new boots, stocked up on freeze-dried meals, and even borrowed my cousin's old Chevy Silverado to haul gear up into the mountains. I drove out from Spokane on a Thursday morning, took Route 95 north, and kept pushing through until I reached a small gas station near Bonner's Ferry. From there, I filled up the tank, bought a last-minute pack of batteries, and then turned off the paved road and followed a winding gravel path that went deep into the Kootenai National Forest. My plan was to hunt mule deer, maybe elk if I got lucky. But mostly, I just wanted time away. I'd gone through a breakup a few months earlier, and everything about life back home felt too loud. Too many people, too many expectations. I just wanted silence. The first signs of snow had already dusted the ground up there. Thin layers, just enough to crunch under boots and mark fresh tracks. That first afternoon, I parked the truck off a logging trail and started unloading. I had one of those big green canvas tents with steel poles and a raised cot inside. I set it up by a small stream where I could fill a bottle without much trouble. I chopped a pile of firewood, set up my cook gear, and made sure my rifle was clean. A Remington 700 .30-06. Old, dependable, and more than enough for the animals in these parts. By dusk, the world around me went quiet. That's the kind of silence I was looking for. The kind where you can hear the wind rubbing through tree branches.
No engines. No voices.
Just me and the woods. The first night went smooth. I slept in layers, zipped deep into my sleeping bag. Woke up before dawn and stepped outside to watch the sky lighten behind black treetops. There were fresh deer tracks near the stream. I boiled water for coffee, loaded my rifle, and hiked east into the ridges. I didn't fire a shot that day. I saw some movement just past a ridge around noon. Maybe a buck, maybe not. I didn't get a clear look, and I'm not the kind of guy who fires blind. Still, I enjoyed the day. Followed game trails, marked trees with red tape so I could find my way back. Ate jerky and trail mix when I stopped to rest. That night, I started to notice little things. The fire didn't feel warm enough. My sleeping bag felt thinner than it should have. The air inside the tent was damp. I woke up a few times just from the cold, which didn't usually happen to me, not with the gear I had. At some point, I thought I heard a branch snap outside, but I chalked it up to a deer or maybe wind. Still, I loaded the rifle and kept it next to the cot. It was probably nothing. That's what I kept telling myself. The next morning, I woke up to find something strange. A raccoon or coyote had gotten into my cooler. The lid had been nudged open, and 2 of my vacuum-sealed meals were gone. But the odd part was the way the rest of the items had been moved. Not torn apart, not chewed or clawed, just shifted. Like someone had picked them up, looked at them, then put them down in the wrong spot. The bungee cords I'd used to secure the cooler were unhooked and tossed a few feet away. That didn't sit right with me. Animals don't do that. If a bear or raccoon gets into your stuff, they tear it up, drag it off, chew it apart. They don't reorganize it. Still, I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. I packed my bag and hiked out again, hoping to shake the weird feeling. I pushed farther than I had the day before, walked nearly 4 miles east, tracking a trail that seemed to follow an old game path. I saw a lot of elk signs, scat, rubs on trees, and once some fur stuck to a branch. I stayed out until the sun started to drop, and then I hustled back fast. Got to camp just as the last light was leaving the sky. That night, I made a bigger fire. I kept the rifle closer. I sat in a folding chair near the flames and just stared into the trees. There's something about firelight. It makes you feel like nothing bad can happen as long as you stay close to it. But the second it goes out, the dark around you feels alive. Around 10 or 11, I heard something again. Not close, not footsteps, more like something heavy shifting through brush 100 yards off. Not a deer. Deer are light on their feet. This was heavier. I froze and listened, but it didn't come closer. It just kept moving, slow and steady, until the sound disappeared. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone, or something, creeping up to the tent. The next morning, I made a call. I packed up my food and locked it inside the truck. Brought the rifle and my knife and started scouting around camp. I wanted to find tracks or signs that something had been coming near. About 50 yards north of the tent, I found something that made my chest go cold. A small patch of dirt, maybe 3 feet across, had been cleared out in a clean circle. Not random, not like an animal digging, just a smooth, flat circle of earth with all the pine needles and debris scraped away. First I thought it was nothing, but then I noticed a few deep scuff marks in the soil, like someone had knelt there.
No boot prints.
Just deep indentations like knees, and beside them, a spot where something had been set down. Something heavy. I backed away from that patch and didn't go back to it. I went back to camp and stayed there for the rest of the day, trying to keep my mind from going places I didn't want it to go. That evening, I started a fire early. I sharpened my knife and made sure the rifle was loaded. I ate fast and listened harder than I ever had before. By the time it was fully dark, I was convinced someone had been watching me. I didn't have proof, but I felt it. A kind of pressure in the air, like the silence wasn't real, like it was being held in place. I didn't go inside the tent that night. I sat out by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, gun across my lap. And that's when I saw it. Movement, just past the trees. Not walking, not running, just stillness that shouldn't have been there. A shape too thick to be a tree, too tall to be a bush. I stared at it for over an hour, and it never moved. But I knew it wasn't part of the woods. Eventually, the fire started to die, and I couldn't take it anymore. I got up slowly, didn't break eye contact with that shape, and walked backwards toward the tent. Once I was inside, I zipped it shut, sat on the cot with my rifle, and didn't blink. I stayed awake until dawn. When the light came, I stepped outside and looked where the shape had been. Nothing, but there were tracks. Human ones, barefoot, deep prints in the frost-covered dirt. Long toes, arches, heels. Whoever it was had stood there for hours, just outside the firelight, barefoot in 30-degree cold. I lost it for a few minutes. I threw my stuff into the truck, ripped the tent poles out of the ground, and didn't care about folding anything. I just wanted out. I didn't even look back at that patch of cleared dirt in the woods. I wasn't gonna ask what it was for. I didn't want to know what had been set there. I just drove. I didn't go back to that forest. Not that year. Not any year after. I told myself for a long time that maybe it had been some weird hermit. Someone who lived in the woods. Maybe a survivalist or some guy who didn't want company. But every time I think about those prints, those bare feet in the freezing cold, I feel sick. I looked up the area later that winter. Found an old article about a man who'd gone missing hunting near the same region in 1998. Never found. No body. Just his tent, his gear, and a rifle still loaded, lying outside the entrance. I don't know what I walked into, but I know it wasn't just an animal. And I know I wasn't alone. I haven't gone hunting since. I still keep the rifle, but it's locked in a cabinet now. And when people ask me why I stopped camping, I just say I got tired of the cold. But the truth is, I've never felt cold like I did that last night in the woods. Not from weather, not from wind, came from something else. And I don't think it's gone.